High school is a place full of memories. Some good, some bad, and for a few, some downright terrifying. Imagine being the new kid in school, finally finding people to sit with at lunch, only to discover they have a dark secret. Or what about a substitute teacher whose friendly smile hides sinister intentions? Now picture a silent, pitch-black basement that holds more than just instruments, or a late-night school adventure that turns into a nightmare. For some students, high school wasn't just about classes and homework, it became the backdrop for chilling, unforgettable experience. In this video, we'll share 4 terrifying true stories of survival, mystery, and fear that will make you rethink those innocent memories of your school days. From twins who lured their new friend into danger to the creepy figure lurking in a bathroom stall, these stories will leave you with more questions than answers. Each tale reveals a hidden world where danger can come from teachers, classmates, or even the shadows themselves. So grab a seat, turn on a light, and brace yourself. These high school horrors aren't just stories, they're warning, because sometimes the scariest lessons aren't in the classroom. Starting at a new school is never easy. For a student at Southern Lehigh High School in Pennsylvania, the first day was a mix of dread and awkwardness. The worst part? Lunch. Walking into the cafeteria, tray in hand, the sea of unfamiliar faces made his stomach churn. Scanning the room, he spotted an empty table near the back. But before he could sit down, 2 identical twins waved him over. "Hey, new guy, sit with us," one of them called out, flashing a wide grin. Their names were Antonio and Bruno, and they seemed friendly enough. The conversation was light, filled with jokes and questions about where he was from. For the first time that day, he felt like he might actually fit in. But as lunch ended, the twins made an unusual suggestion. "You should hang out with us tonight," Antonio said. "There's this cool spot near the old cemetery. It's quiet, no one will bother us." Something about the invitation felt odd. But eager to make friends, he agreed. Later that night, as he made his way toward the cemetery, a creeping sense of unease settled over him. The streets were dimly lit, and the quietness felt oppressive. Why a cemetery? He thought to himself, replaying the strange vibe he'd picked up from the twins earlier. Their laughter at lunch had seemed a little too forced, their smiles a little too wide. By the time he arrived, the air felt heavier, colder. The twins were waiting for him just outside the cemetery gates, their figures barely visible in the moonlight. "Come on," Bruno said, motioning toward the woods. Reluctantly, he followed them, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound breaking the silence. As they ventured deeper into the woods, something felt wrong. The twins were quieter now, their playful demeanor replaced with an unsettling seriousness. Then, he heard it. Footsteps, but not theirs. "Did you hear that?" he asked, stopping in his tracks. Before they could answer, a figure emerged from the shadows. The next moments were a blur of chaos and panic. The stranger lunged at him, knocking him to the ground. He caught a glimpse of a masked face and gloved hands before instincts took over. Kicking and struggling, he managed to break free and sprint back toward the street, his heart pounding like a drum. The twins didn't follow. Shaking, he made it home and immediately told his parents what had happened. They contacted the school, and an investigation led to the twins' expulsion. It turned out they had a history of troubling behavior and had lured other students into dangerous situations before. But the nightmare wasn't over. A week later, he woke up to a chilling realization. His bedroom window was wide open. He always locked it, but that night it was ajar, letting in the cold night air. Then he saw it, a figure crouched in the corner of his room. Before he could scream, the intruder bolted, disappearing out the window into the darkness. The police were called, but no evidence was found to link the break-in to the twins. Despite the lack of proof, he was certain it had been them. His family installed cameras, and though no further incidents occurred, the fear lingered. Months later, he still avoided cemeteries, woods, and any hint of familiarity with strangers. The encounter with Antonio and Bruno was a lesson he would never forget. Some friendships come at too high a price. It was 2007, and the freshman was adjusting to the chaos of high school. New faces, new routines, and unfamiliar teachers. Among them was a substitute gym teacher. At first glance, he seemed ordinary enough, blending into the background of the bustling school day. But to her, there was something unsettling about the way he acted. He wasn't overtly creepy, at least not at first. It was in the small things, his tendency to hover nearby during gym class or the way his gaze lingered just a second too long. Then there was the moment he placed a hand on her shoulder during roll call. It wasn't aggressive, but it was enough to make her skin crawl. She brushed it off as overthinking. After all, teachers were supposed to be trusted authority figures. One afternoon, the freshman was in the girls' locker room, changing after class. Most of the students had already left, and she was gathering her things when the substitute appeared at the entrance. "Forgot something in here," he said casually, holding up a clipboard as if that explained his presence. She nodded politely, expecting him to leave, but instead, he lingered. "Need help with anything?" he asked. She quickly shook her head. "No, I'm fine." He didn't move. Suddenly, the lights in the locker room flickered and went out, plunging the space into near darkness. Panic surged through her as she heard his footsteps getting closer. Adrenaline kicked in, and she bolted for the exit. The substitute called after her, his tone shifting from calm to annoyed. "Wait, I just wanted to talk." But she didn't stop. She burst into the hallway, her heart racing, and ran until she found a group of students in the cafeteria. The substitute didn't follow. She never told anyone about what happened. Fear and embarrassment kept her quiet. Would anyone believe her? He hadn't physically harmed her, and without proof, she feared the school would dismiss her claims as exaggeration. For weeks, she avoided gym class entirely, using every excuse she could to steer clear of him. Eventually, the substitute's assignment ended, and she breathed a sigh of relief. But the fear stayed with her. To this day, she wonders about the substitute's motive. Was it just a misunderstanding, or had she narrowly avoided something far worse? The experience left her with a heightened sense of caution, a constant reminder that even in a place meant to be safe, danger can sometimes lurk just out of sight. The band room at her high school was always bustling with activity, except during after-school hours. That's when the hallways grew quiet, and the space took on an eerie stillness. For one student, it became the perfect time to practice in the basement storage room, where she could focus without interruptions. It was a dim, cluttered space filled with spare music stand, old instruments, and forgotten equipment. She didn't mind the darkness or the musty smell. It was her haven. But one evening, something happened that changed her perception of the basement forever. She was halfway through her practice session when the overhead lights flickered. It wasn't unusual for the old basement, but this time, they didn't come back on. The sudden plunge into darkness made her freeze. She fumbled for her phone to use as a flashlight, but as she reached for it, she heard something that sent a chill down her spine. The sound of heavy breathing. At first, she thought it might be her imagination. But then came the unmistakable scrape of something being dragged across the floor. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. The only response was a faint shuffle in the darkness. Her instincts screamed at her to hide. Clutching her phone, she crept toward a storage closet in the corner of the room, her movements slow and deliberate to avoid making noise. Once inside, she closed the door as quietly as she could and crouched behind a stack of boxes. Her heart pounded in her chest as she listened intently. The sounds grew closer. Footsteps, the faint scrape of shoes against the concrete floor. Whoever was in the basement wasn't in a hurry. Then, the breathing stopped. The silence was deafening, stretching on for what felt like hours. She held her breath, hoping whoever it was had left. Suddenly, the door to the storage closet creaked open. A hand rested on her shoulder. She froze, too terrified to scream. The hand lingered for a moment, then retreated. Gathering every ounce of courage, she bolted out of the closet, pushing past the figure in the doorway. She didn't look back, sprinting up the stairs and into the band room, where she found her teacher locking up for the evening. "Someone's in the basement," she shouted. The teacher immediately called security, who conducted a thorough search of the basement. But they found no one. No signs of a struggle, no misplaced item, nothing to indicate anyone had been there. Despite the lack of evidence, she knew what she had experienced was real. For weeks, she avoided the basement, opting to practice at home instead. The incident left her with more questions than answers. Who had been in the basement with her? And why hadn't they harmed her when they had the chance? To this day, the memory of that hand on her shoulder haunts her, a chilling reminder of how quickly a safe space can become a place of fear. Every school has its fair share of legends. At this particular high school, the basement was rumored to be haunted. Students whispered about strange noises, flickering lights, and unexplained shadows. For a group of friends, these stories weren't a deterrent, they were an invitation. One weekend, they hatched a plan to explore the basement at night. With the main building locked, their only way in was through a broken window near the back of the school. Armed with flashlights and nerves of steel, they climbed in, ready for adventure. The basement was just as creepy as they had imagined, dimly lit, with long, narrow hallways that seemed to stretch endlessly. The air was cold, and every step they took echoed unervingly in the silence. "This is so cool," one of the friends whispered, shining his flashlight around. The narrator, however, felt a growing unease. Something about the basement felt wrong, almost alive, but he kept his fears to himself, not wanting to be the one to chicken out. As they ventured deeper, they passed empty classrooms and storage rooms filled with dusty furniture and forgotten school supplies. That's when the narrator noticed a figure walking down the hall ahead of him. "Hey, wait up," he called out, assuming it was one of his friends. But when he turned the corner, the figure was gone. Feeling unnerved, the narrator decided to stop in one of the bathrooms to collect himself. The space was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on your ears. As he splashed water on his face, he heard it, faint, high-pitched laughter. Slowly, he turned toward the stalls. At first, everything seemed normal, but then he noticed movement. In one of the stalls, someone was standing on the toilet, peering over the edge of the door, their face partially obscured. "Hello," he called out, his voice shaking. The figure didn't move. It just stared. Panic set in. Without waiting to see what would happen next, the narrator bolted out of the bathroom, his flashlight bouncing wildly as he ran. He found his friends near the basement entrance, laughing and joking as if nothing had happened. "Where were you?" one of them asked. "There's someone else down here," the narrator panted. "We need to leave now." Sensing his fear, the group didn't argue. They hurried back to the broken window, climbing out into the cool night air. For a moment, the narrator felt safe again. But as they turned to leave, one of his friends froze. "Look," she whispered, pointing to the school building. Pressed against one of the basement windows was a figure, their hands and face pressed against the glass as they watched the group. They ran until they couldn't run anymore, finally collapsing onto a nearby curb. No one said a word for a long time, their breaths coming in shaky gasps. In the days that followed, they speculated about who or what they had seen. Was it another student pulling a prank? A janitor? Or was there truth to the rumors about the basement being haunted? They never found out, and none of them ever returned to the school basement. The experience became a shared secret, a story they only told in whispers. For the narrator, it was a lesson he would never forget. Some places are better left unexplored.